apple tree.
What?
It wasn't even an apple tree.
I don't even know what tree it was. It was a nuclear chemistry tree. All right, good evening. We're learning Maseches Chagigah, and we're going to be doing Chav Beis Amud Beis and Daf Chav Gimel. We're going to push ahead, and on Shabbos, I already communicated with the office. Daf Yomi will be 45 minutes before Mincha for this Shabbos because we're only doing one blot. And right now, we are wow, that's impressive. We're in the middle of a sugya right now. We were learning yesterday a somewhat sophisticated sugya about whether or not we're allowed to tovel one kli inside another kli as it relates to truma and as it relates to kodesh, a higher level of food. So truma is a low level of food, relatively speaking, and kodesh, eating meat or preparing to eat meat of a korban, is a much loftier level. And our Mishnah had 11 chumras in it, 11 discussions in halacha that we were strict about tuma v'tara. And when it came to one kli being inside another kli, we said that that's only allowed for truma, but it's not allowed for kodesh. And our Gemara, 8 lines or so from the bottom of Chav Beis Amud Aleph, says as follows: V'nechush l'she'ela. If in fact we allow for one kli to be inside another for truma, then maybe taka there will be some truma, and maybe I'm a chaver, but I might borrow something from an am haaretz she'ela. In which case, when I use that for truma, it's going to cause for problems. So then, where do we see that this is a concern? So the Gemara says this is based on a Mishnah. Ditnan. The Mishnah writes in regards to the halachos of ohel and tuma v'tara. So let's say that there is an ohel. Let's say that there's a person who, God forbid, dies in a particular building, and in there there are pottery containers. So the pasuk in Chumash says that if it's ein samid pasil alav, if it doesn't have a closure on top of it, an enclosure, then everything inside is going to become tamid. But if it is covered, if that pottery vessel is covered, then everything is fine. So on this, there's a machlokas in the Tanoim. Kli cheres matzil al hakol divrei Beis Hillel. Anything that's inside the pottery will be saved from tuma. That's the sheet of Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai says a very cryptic response, and here's what he says: Beis Shammai omrim, that if you have a house in which there's a mace, and inside that house with the mace is a pottery container, and it's sealed. So Beis Shammai says, no, eino matzil ela al ochlin ve'al hamashkin ve'al kli cheres. It can only save food and drink and other kli cheres that are inside, but it doesn't save anything else. That's very difficult. It's literally a pasuk in Chumash that if you have pottery that's closed and there's tumas ohel, everything inside should be fine. So what is Beis Shammai talking about? So Beis Hillel says, what are you talking about? Amru lahem Beis Shammai Beis Hillel mipnei ma. How could you say that only some of the things inside the pottery are going to be okay and some are not? Why would you say that? So Amru Beis Shammai, they responded, mipnei shu tameh al gabe am haaretz, because the kli itself was touched before it was closed. It was touched by an am haaretz, and the kli is tahor. Ve'ein kli tameh chotzetz, and the kli is not going to create a chatzitza, and that is a problem because then everything inside should be tameh. So then the Gemara says back to Beis Shammai, what are you talking about? If the kli is not chotzetz, and there's a dead person in the house, then everything should be tameh. Says the Gemara, Amr Lam Beis Hillel, you said that the drinks and food that are inside this thing are going to be tahor. So in your own case, Beis Shammai, something doesn't make sense. You're saying the kli is going to be tameh because an am haaretz touched it. You're saying that because it's tameh, so therefore it's eino chotzetz, it cannot separate from a mace to whatever inside. Yet you said that the drinks are still fine. So that's not so simple. Amru lahem Beis Shammai, they said, when we said that you're allowed to eat or drink that which was inside, as we turn to the top of Chav Beis Amud Beis, says the Gemara, that was la'atzmo tiharnu. That was only for the sake of the am haaretz, but you're not allowed to eat it. And then says the Gemara, aval netaharas akli shetaharaso lecha velo. You're going to take a kli that belongs to him, and we're going to say that it's pure for you and for him. That's not possible. So this line is actually the line that we really needed, because this line where it says shetiharta lach velo means that I might use his container, which means that there is she'ela. So we'll speak about this more, but that was already the points of the Gemara. And then the Gemara, in the name of Rabbi Yeshua, basically starts what would have been a verbal fist fight between Beis Shammai and Rabbi Yeshua. Tanya, Amar Rabbi Yeshua, boshni midivrechem Beis Shammai. You're embarrassing me. How can you say that? You're saying something that makes no sense at all. Because why? Efshar, is it possible, Isha lasha be'areva, that a woman is kneading dough in a bowl, and Isha ve'areva tmei and shiva, and the woman and the bowl are going to be tamei for 7 days with tumas meis uvatzek tahor, but the dough is going to be tahor. How can that be? How can you have it be that the food inside that beaker, inside that earthenware vessel, is going to be tahor? After all, it should be absolutely tameh. And a similar mashal to ask the question. A lugin is a container that holds liquids. Lugin malo mashkin, you have this canteen of some kind that holds liquid. Lugin tameh tumas shiva umashkin tahor. And you're going to say the canteen is going to be tameh, but the liquid is not. Beis Shammai, how can you say this? It doesn't make any sense. You can't have it be that this earthenware container is only going halfsies on tuma. Only ochlin and mashkin are going to be okay. But had it been something else, had it been a non-cheres item, it would have been tameh. It doesn't make any sense. So one of Beis Shammai's talmidim went to the defense of Beis Shammai. Netapil lo talmid echad mitalmidei Beis Shammai. One of the talmidim of Beis Shammai went over to Rabbi Yehoshua and he said, Amar lo, Omer lach taimo shel Beis Shammai. Would you mind? Can I give you pshat? Let me explain to you where Rabbi Shammai. Don't get so angry. Let me tell you where Rabbi Shammai is coming from. Amar lo, Rabbi Yehoshua says back to him, Emor. Please explain Beis Shammai. I'd love to hear. Amar lo, here's what the Talmud said. We're 8 lines down or so on Chav Beis Amud Beis. Amar lo, kli tamei chotzetz or ena chotzetz. He said he's playing a little shakla b'tarya game with Rabbi Yehoshua. He says, if you have a kli that's tamei, does it stop tuma or does it not stop tuma? So Rabbi Yehoshua answers with what should be obvious. Amar le, ena chotzetz. Good. So then the Talmud says back to him again, Kli shel am haaretz, tameh o tahor. Is the vessel of an am haaretz tameh or tahor? Well, we always assume that when we're dealing with truma, that we assume that the vessel of an am haaretz is going to be tahor, tameh. So amar le tameh. He says it's going to be tameh. Good. Then the student says back to Rabbi Yehoshua as follows: V'ima ta'omer lo tameh, klum mashkiach alecha. You go over this guy; he's not so educated. Say, by the way, it's tameh. Your whole kli is tameh, and everything inside of it is tameh. Is he even going to listen to you? Think about how dynamic this is. Really, it's tameh. But the Gemara is saying in the name of Beis Shammai, you're talking to someone who isn't going to listen to you. When I was in Smicha, there was someone who came in to teach us how to paskin shilos, the mahalach of paskining shilos. So he said that he does this with everyone he gives a tough psak to. After he lays down the psak, he says, is this something that actually works for you? Is this something that you can do? What do you mean? Is this something you can do? Because halacha is very dynamic. If you choose that you're not going to keep halacha in the ideal way, you're better keeping it in a slightly less ideal way than breaking halacha outright. Lots of kulas. The halacha is very flexible. So here the Gemara says, we know that this guy, that this am haaretz is not going to listen to us. Not only that, v'lo od, elash ima ta'omer lo tameh. If you tell him that something is tameh, omer lach, he's going to say to you, shali tahor v'shalach tameh. He's going to get upset and say, my stuff is tahor and yours is not. V'zeu taiman shel Beis Shammai. And the Gemara says that when it comes to a chaver is never going to take part in this food. And an am haaretz will take part in this food, so no harm, no foul, and therefore we're playing the psychology card. Beis Shammai's Talmud explains the shita of Beis Shammai. What was the response of Rabbi Yehoshua hearing this explanation? Miyad halach Rabbi Yehoshua v'nishtateach al kibrei Beis Shammai. He went and he prostrated himself all over the kever of Beis Shammai. He felt terrible. Amar ne'enesi lachem atzamos Beis Shammai. I have tortured your bones, Beis Shammai. I've said not nice things. It's not right. Mastum moshelachem kach. If the more difficult halachos are as beautiful and clear as the one that your Talmud just explained, mifurashos halachas kama v'kama, the ones that should have been clear, all the more so they're beautiful. Now we don't paskin like Beis Shammai, and even more sharply, we've already seen in the Gemara that Beis Shammai is Eino Mishnah. It's not even counted as Talmud Torah according to some versions of the Gemara, some understandings of that Gemara. Either way, Rabbi Yehoshua says that this really is quite beautiful, and in fact, Rabbi Yehoshua was so broken by what he had done by criticizing Beis Shammai. The Gemara says, Amru, they said about him, Kol Yama, his whole life, Hushcheru Shinav, his teeth became blackened, Mibnei Tani Yosav, because he fasted so many times for the sake of his error with Beis Shammai. So then the Gemara says, this is a whole lengthy Gemara, and what were we trying to ask about? Remember what we started with. We were talking about whether or not we should be concerned about borrowing a kli from an am haaretz for truma. So the Gemara says a third of the way down, Ketani Mihas. The Ketani Mihas, remember, that's our language. Ketani Mihas means we just learned something that is the crux of our question. What did we learn? We learned lach velo. That belongs to him, but both people use it. So therefore the Gemara says, Alma, sha'alinan minayu. We see that we do taka have people who might borrow, or you have a chaver who might borrow from an am haaretz. Why aren't we concerned about that? So says the Gemara, a beautiful, simple answer to this question. When a chaver borrows something from an am haaretz, we're not concerned about the truma because ki shailinan minahu matbelinan lahu. If I borrow something from an am haaretz and I'm going to be using it for a kadosh purpose such as truma, I have to take it to the mikvah. I have to make sure that it's tahor, and I just have to assume that he's an am haaretz and it's going to be tameh. So ihachi, if that's true, says the Gemara, we're just going to take it to the mikvah, then why didn't Beis Shammai just say that? So then ihachi nehadru lahu Beis Shammai kishalin minar mapelin lahu. Why didn't he say that? Says the Gemara, he couldn't say that because tamei meis by hazah gimel v'zayin. Because in the case that Hillel was dealing with, there was tumas meis. And with tumas meis, you don't just take it to the mikvah. With tumas meis, you have to have hazah, you have to have the sprinkling on day 7, on day 3, and on day 7. Umana and a utensil, lezayin yome, for 7 days, lo mushle inshe. People don't usually lend out their utensils for 7 days. Now that measurement of 7 days was a standard in their time. They didn't have a lot of kalim. They had one or two pots. If you're rich, you had a couple of pots. So when for our weddings, for whatever, we got like a whole set. That's what most people have in their homes. And then they break, you buy more. Fine. We usually have a lot. So usually people didn't lend out something for a whole week. And because someone didn't lend something out for the whole week, and because Tumas Meis is a week, it's day 3 and day 7 of Tahara. So therefore he couldn't give that response. That brings us halfway down to on Chav Beis Amud Beis. Says the Gemara, ve'atvila lo mehemne. The Gemara seems to imply that an Am Haaretz is not trusted in regards to whether or not he went to the mikvah or put something in the mikvah. Says the Gemara, that's not true. Tanya, the Brisa writes, Ne'eman and Ame Haaretz al taras tfilas tamemes. That's very explicit. You made an implication that we don't trust an Am Haaretz as it relates to Tumas Meis, but the Brisa says we absolutely do. So Amar Abaye, he responds, Lo kasha. Really, there's no difficulty in understanding how we trust an Am Haaretz. Habegufo, habekela. When it comes to his own goof, so then we trust an Am Haaretz to say that he's Tamei Meis. But when it comes to his kalim, he is not trustworthy. So this is one of the things in halacha that's really subtle and beautiful, which is that when we say, do we trust someone? So we have to split hairs. We trust you in area X, but not in area Y. We trust the Am Haaretz to say I'm Tamei Meis by his own goof, but we don't trust him to say that by kalim. So you have to really know who you're talking about to go through the decision-making process. So that's what he says. And Rava says this is not a problem about the Am Haaretz, but for a different reason. Really, idi v'kaleb. Really, in both cases, we trust him in regards to Tumas Meis, but what the Mishnayos that conflict mean is that we're both talking about kalim, below kasha. How do we answer up for the Am Haaretz? Ha de Amar, in one case, we have an Am Haaretz who says, Lo hitbalti kli besoch kli. I did not do one kli inside of another. There we trust him. Ha de Amar hitbalti, I did. Aval lo hitbalti bekli she'ein befiv kishvo feres hanod. However, I did not do it in a very, very small tube, a tube that has just a 1-inch diameter, like we learned about yesterday. So there we don't trust him. And that's even more subtle. Rav is taking it even further. We trust him to say that I didn't do kli besoch kli, but we don't trust him to say how big the mikveh is. Unbelievable splitting of hairs here just to try and get down to how much we trust in Am Haaretz. And by the way, it only applies in that generation. Our Amaratzim we're really Amaratzim. These people were very educated, but we're all the way down. We don't even know these halachos to even know that we would make the distinctions. So the Gemara here is being very, very subtle in its splitting of hairs. The Tanya, we have a brisa like this as well. We're 2/3 of the way down. Ne'eman Am Haaretz lomar peros lo huchsheru. We trust in Am Haaretz to say that the fruits were not wet. And they were not b'chiyutan, they did not get wet. But we don't trust him to say that they were in fact wet, but I didn't make them tummy. Then says the Gemara, ve'agufo mi mehemen. One of the answers that we gave above in the name of Abaye is that we do trust we do trust an Am Haaretz to say that he's Tamei Meis. Says the Gemara, that's not true. Ve'agufo mi mehemen, do we really believe in Vatanya? The Brisa writes, Chaver sheba lehazos. If you have a chaver, someone who's a ben Torah, not an Am Haaretz, and he needs hazah to get out of Tumas Meis, mazan alav miyad. We don't even question him. You look at him, you ask him where he lives, where he davens, who the shul rabbi is. Once you discern he's not an Am Haaretz, you can do the hazah right away. But Am Haaretz shebala hazos. If you have an Am Haaretz, someone who's clearly uneducated in this level of nuance, so then Am Haaretz shebala hazos ein mazan alav ad sheyaseh befanenu shlishi v'shvi. Because we don't really trust his level of knowledge, we therefore require of him to wait a week before we do hazah, or at least wait till day 3 and day 7, but we don't do it miyad. So therefore we see that we don't trust an Am Haaretz when he says that he's Tamei Meis. So therefore the Gemara says, Ella, Amar Abaye, mitoch chomer she'echmarta la b'tchilaso, because when he shows up the first time and he says, the Am Haaretz shows up and says, I'm Tamei Meis, and then we say, you have to wait till day 3 and 7. So because they know the halacha is so strict, we therefore are going to be mekel at the end of the count. He kalta Allah besofo. If he comes and says, today's my 7th day of Tuma, very specific answer, then we do trust the Am Haaretz. That brings us to the two dots, about 15, 20 lines from the bottom of the page on Chaf Beis and Beis. Let's continue. We had said in our Mishnah, Achoraim v'toch, that there is the outside of a container and an inside. What does it mean, these different parts of the kli? So the Gemara says, Kiditnan, like the Mishnah says. If you have a kli where the outside of a kli became tameh with liquid, then only the outside of the kli is problematic. But tocho, ogno, ozna, v'yadav, these four parts, the inside, the actual rim at the top of the kli. Ozno is the handle. It's actually a back part of the kli. The yadav and the handle, tahor, and all of those are tahor. So basically, if you touch the back of a kli and it becomes tameh, then only that is tameh. However, nitzma tocho, if the inside of a kli becomes tameh, then everything is tameh kulo tameh. So this is just a very small but concise description of some of the halachos of tuma by a kli and its various parts. Our Mishnah had also said that there was a part of the kli called ubesat tzvita, my besat tzvita. So the Gemara says it's a machlokes in the Amoraim. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel makom shetzovto. It's the place where you grasp the handle. It's actually like in our mugs where you have the loop that you hold on to. That would be the besat tzvita. V'cheinu omer. Similarly, we have a pasuk. And the pasuk says in Sefer Rus, the story of Boaz, when he gave over grains to her, the pasuk says, "Vayitzba lo kali," and he gave her grains, roasted grains of some kind. So that's what Boaz gave to Rus, and that word vayitzba is kind of giving over, and she grabbed it with her hand, and that's how we know that it means that it's the handle. But Rav Asi Amar Rav Yochanan, he says no, it's makom shenekiye hadas tzovin. It's a place where the nekiye hadas, the people who were very nucky, were very clean, that they would dip their foods. They used to have some kind of attachment to their tray, like if they had it's almost kind of like a place to dip their food. So let's say they were eating bread and there was oil, so they'd have a larger plate. And then there was an attachment, like a little bubble attachment onto the plate that they could put oil in. So they're eating and it's attached to the plate. So that seems to be what's going on here, where it says that it's sovto, that so that was the second answer of the Gemara, that it's not talking about a handle, but talking about a little attached cleat. Then the Gemara says the two lines before the wide lines on Chaf Beis and the Beis. The Gemara says Tani Rabbi Kamei de Rab Nachman Kol hakelim ein lahem achorayim b'toch echad kodshei hamikdash ve'echad kodshei hagvul. And here this is difficult. It doesn't fit with our Mishnah. We're going to ask about this. Here Rabbi says in front of Rab Nachman, he says when it comes to utensils, there's no difference between the outside and the inside, which is strange because we just said there was a difference above, that from the outside, you're only matame the outside, but from the inside, you're matame the entire kli, all the parts of the kli. And as well, on the last short line, going to the first long line, it's true with kodshei mikdash and kodshei gvul. Now, kodshei gvul is a new language, one that we haven't seen yet. So the Gemara asks on it, Amar le kodshei hagvul ma'ninhu. What are we talking about? So it says the Gemara that's talking about truma. Says the Gemara, if it's talking about truma, then your mamish going right against our Mishnah. Our Mishnah specifically said that when it comes to truma, that these things all have different halachic approaches. If you only touch one part, then only one of those parts becomes tameh. So how can you say that there is no difference between them? So says the Gemara, maybe you misunderstood the case. Dilma, maybe it wasn't actually talking about truma. Perhaps it was talking about a case. It's talking about a different case altogether, and therefore we don't have to say that it's talking about truma. And in fact, if that's true, the Gemara says 6 lines from the bottom, ad kartan milsa. This reminds me of something that was said in the name of the Amar Rabba bar Avua. What did he say? He said, like our Mishnah, that achas esrei milos shanukan. We saw this Gemara yesterday, that there are 11 chumras in the Mishnah that we saw in Daf Yud Ches, and sheish rishonos bein lekodesh bein lechulin shnas taras hakodesh. The first 6 apply to someone who is dealing with kodesh directly, or for someone who treats chulin like kodesh. And achronos, the last 5, lekodesh avalo lechulin shnas taras hakodesh, only apply to the first 5. Only apply to the achronos, only apply to kodesh, but not to chulin shenas al taras hakodesh. And then the next case in our Mishnah, very strange case. We know that there's this thing called tumas medras. So tumas medras is where a zav or a nida, they place their weight down on a mattress, on a chair, on anything that they set down. That thing also becomes a tuma, just like the nida. Now, what if you're carrying that thing? You're not stepping on it. Can you carry it at the same time that you carry truma? So what did our Mishnah say? In the 2 dots that's right here, 3 lines from the bottom, if I'm carrying something that has tumas medras on it, can I also carry truma? So there the Mishnah said, no, truma, you can't. Avalo es hakodesh. So let's say that I'm carrying a piece of paper, or I'm carrying a garment. It has to be a kli of some kind. So I'm carrying right now a pillow. And Anida had placed her weight on here or sat on here, and the pillow is Tameh Tumas Medrus. At the same time that I'm holding this, can I also hold Truma? Just walking. Can I do both of those things? Now, you can't transfer Truma by touching them, but how strict are we going to be? So this is what the Mishnah says. No se'asa medres, no se'asa Truma. You are allowed to carry both. However, our Mishnah had said that when it comes to Kodesh, that you're not allowed. Lo asa Kodesh. So says the Gemara, why not? Kodesh, my time alone. What is the reason why we're not allowed to carry something that's tumas medrus and something that's kodesh at the same time if the tuma cannot transfer from one to the other? So says the Gemara, mishum ma'aseh shahaya, simply because there was one story, one time that raised concern, that caused problems, I should say, when a person was carrying something that was tameh tumas medrus at the same time he was carrying kodesh. What was the case? So the Gemara says, 2 lines from the bottom, Damar of Yehuda Damar Shmuel. What was the case where a person was carrying Kodesh and that which they were holding, which was Tameh Tumas Medrus, caused a problem? So there was a person who was transporting a barrel of wine, and he was carrying it from one place to another place. Top of Chav Gimel Amud Aleph. And what happened? So what happened is as follows. V'nifsika ritzua shel sandalo. They were wearing sandals. Their sandals were kind of flat on the bottom with leather straps that tied to the top. And one of his shoelaces tore. So he can't wear a shoe anymore. Shoes are useless, right? If you have a shoe that's only tie on the top with no actual, it's not like our shoes where the laces break. You can still wear the shoes without laces. Okay, it's not tight, but you can still wear them. But there was no top to the shoe. So what did he do? Vinatla, he took it off. V'hinicha al pi chavis, and he put it at the top of the barrel. V'nafla le'avir hachavis v'nitmeis, and he was a zav, and therefore the shoes he's walking on are tameh tumas medrus, and the shoe dipped into the airspace of the wine, and it was kodesh wine, and therefore the halacha is that he ruined all of that kodesh wine. But Osasha at that time, because of this case, Amru, they said, Hanoseas hamedrus, noseas truma, avaloas kodesh. That's what's going on in our Mishnah. The reason why we don't allow a person to carry something that's tameh tumas medrus, that a zav walked on, or that Anita sat on, whatever it was, and something holy, you can't carry them both because of that one case where the shoelace dipped itself into the airspace of the barrel and was metame all the wine. Says the Gemara, Ihachi Trumanami. If it's true that we can cause for a problem with Kodesh by the shoelace of the Tumas Medrus, by that hanging into the barrel, why wouldn't we have the same exact concern about Truma? Why would we only have the concern about Kodesh? So says the Gemara, Hamani, who is our Mishnah like? Our Mishnah that only restricts Tumas Medrus being carried with Kodesh and not with Truma. That is the Shita of Reb Chananya ben Akavya. What does Reb Chananya ben Akavya say? The Amar lo asru ella biyardein uvesfina uchemaisa shahaya. In another case, which we're going to learn right now, in another case, a rabbinic injunction was put into place, but only under those very specific circumstances. And just like in this case, we're about to learn that the injunction was only in place for that one perfect scenario. The same is true here. It only applies by Kodesh with the Maaseh Shahaya that we saw. So if our Mishnah is like Rabbi Chananya ben Akavya, what was his case? Says the Gemara, 6 lines down, Chav Gimel Amud Aleph. The Amar, what does he say? Lo asru ela biyardin uvesfinu chamaisa shahaya. The only restriction that he felt was applicable in this case was under the circumstances, as we'll see, by the Jordan River on a boat with what happened. What happened to Tanya? The Brisa writes, Lo yisa adam mechatas ve'efer chatas. A person cannot carry the water that will be used for a chatas, along with the actual ashes that are used for a chatas, v'ya'avirim b'yardim b'svina. They're not allowed to carry them on the Jordan River on a boat. Very specific. And you can't stand on one side of the Jordan River and throw it to the other side. You also cannot go in a boat. You also can't carry these two items, the water for the mechatas and the ashes for the mechatas, on an animal. No piggyback rides either. The halacha is that you have to actually carry them with your own 2 feet on the ground. Important note, please God, Beis HaMikdash will be rebuilt soon. We have to make sure that the ashes and the water are not carried on an animal. They have to be only carried on foot. That's the sheet of the Tanakama. Aval, there are some leniencies in the Tanakama, ma'avirin al gabe gesher ve'eno choshesh, even though technically a bridge is man-made and it's not actually earth, doesn't mean you can't walk on gravel because gravel is not the way God made the world. You can walk over a bridge. It's not a problem. That's the sheets of the Tanakama. He applied this idea more widely. He said that the restriction of mechatas and eferchatas applies everywhere. However, that was not the sheet of Rabbi Chananya ben Akavya. Rabbi Chananya ben Akavya Omer, he's similar to the author of our Mishnah. What does he say? Lo asru ela b'yardin u'v'sfinuch ma'aser shahaya. The Tanakama, you took it too far. The case that we were dealing with was a person who was on a boat on the Jordan River, and he made a big mistake. What ended up happening was, in this particular case, we'll see soon what happened, that there's tumas mace on the boat, and it was matame everything. In that one case, in that isolated case on the Jordan River, in that boat, that's when there's a restriction. So we asked this question, why don't we say that we have the same problem with Truma as we do with Kodesh, that we should not be allowed to carry medrash with Truma, just like we can't carry Tumas medrash with Kodesh. The Gemara says, conceptually, you're right. It should be the same concern, but we're only going to institute the rabbinic injunction by our case of carrying Tumas medrash with Kodesh, only by Kodesh, because that's where the story happened with the barrel of wine. Last line there. Yes, Rabbi Chananya ben Akavya Omer lo asher b'yardin u'v'sfinuch ma'aser shahaya. What actually was matame the mechatas and efer chatas on that boat? My ma'aser shahaya. What was he referring to? Damar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rab. Ma'aser ba'adam echad she'amavir mechatas ve'efer chatas b'yardin u'v'sfinuch. This guy's job was to make sure that he got the ashes from the chatas and the water and brought them to the Beis Hamikdash. So he had to take a boat, and he got on a boat. V'nimtzak zayis meis tachu b'karki isa shel sfina. And they found that there was a pound of flesh, enough to be metame tumas meis. There was a part of a dead body stuck to the bottom of the boat. That's not good. And what ended up happening? It made everything on the boat tameh, including the mechatas and the efer chatas. Amru lo yisa adam mechatas ve'efer chatas v'yavirim b'yardim b'sfina. All right, end of story. So then we learned a very important halacha here. We asked the question, why is it that in regards to carrying something that's tameh tumas medrash, why did we say that you can carry this with truma, like you can carry it with truma, but if this wasn't truma and it was kodesh, that's not allowed. So we said, because something happened once with the barrel and with the shoe for the zav that was tameh tumas medrash. Why don't we apply it to truma? Because we only applied in the case that we actually saw the concern, and we brought a raya from Rabbi Chananya ben Akavya. Now the Gemara is going to ask a couple of quick, rapid questions, and then we'll get to the next sugya. The Gemara says, just about halfway down on Chav Gimel Amud Aleph, what about Ibayalahu? The case that we had was a sandal tameh, where the guy was a zav, and therefore his shoe was tameh tumas medrash. What if he wasn't a zav? Sandal tahar mahu. What would we still apply the rabbinic injunction here as well to say that you can't carry tumas medrash with kodesh? Yes or no? And also chavis psucha, the wine barrel had a little bit of an opening at the top that the shoelace could get into. What if it was a chavis stuma mahu? What if it was a sealed barrel? We don't answer these questions. And then the Gemara asks another question: what if taka you did avar v'nasa mahu? Let's say that you actually are holding that shoe, which is tameh tumas medrash, and you pick up kodesh. I know you shouldn't, but if you do, what's the problem? Did you actually cause a problem? So there, the Gemara says, Rav Ila Amar im avar v'nasa tameh. If in fact you did that, you have actually caused tuma, albeit rabbinically. And Rav Zera Amar avar v'nasa tar. No, it's just a precautionary measure. It doesn't mean that it's tameh. It just means that you need to be careful. And that brings us to the two dots. And we had said in our Mishnah, Kelim hanigmarim b'tara, that if you have a kli that is not yet made, you're in the middle of building it. So let's say that I'm making this kli, and let's say that it's not a kli until I add the end here. I have to add the end cap. So before it's there, it's not a kli. It's a zero. You can't be metame it. You can't make something tameh that isn't a kli, right? So therefore, if it's not made yet, then great. What if I finish making this betara? So the Gemara says by truma it's fine to use, but by kodesh you have to tovel it. So says the Gemara, digamrin human. Who's the one who actually finished making the kli? Now, if the kli was not yet made, there's no tuma. Once it's finished being made, now it's makeh b'patish, now it's a kli. Well, then it just depends who's the one who finished it. If the person who finished making this kli was a chaver, was a frum guy, lama luhu tefila, why would he have to send it to the mikvah? After all, he's a tahor. It wasn't a kli to ever become tameh, all is well. Says the Gemara, Ella, if you want to say degamrinu am ha'aretz, well, that's a bigger problem. You can't say that the craftsman here was an Am Haaretz, because if that's true, then the language of our Mishnah has a terrible implication. Nigmarin v'tara karilu. How can you say that an Am Haaretz, who is by definition Tameh, that he was the guy who finished the Kli? Because what did we call it in our Mishnah? Nigmarim b'tahara. It can't be him. It has to be that it was our first guy, the Chaver. So it says the Gemara, you're absolutely right. Amar Rabba Bar Shila, Amar Rab Masna, Amar Shmuel. Le'olam de gamrinu chaver. Really, what happened was that the craftsman who finished the utensil was a chaver, was a ben Torah. Umishum tzinur da'am haaretz. But there was some spit from an am haaretz, and it got on this kli, and we're not sure about when it got there. The nafal emas. Was there some spit that landed on this particular kli? If you want to say that this Am Haaretz was walking by and he spits out of his mouth, but it lands on this utensil before it's finished being made. Well, who cares if it's before it's finished being made? It's not a kli. It's not a kli until it's a kli. You can't be metameh it. So then halav mono, it's still not a utensil. And Ella, if you want to say basar de gamre, if you want to say that the Am Haaretz was walking by and he spit out right next to this person as the kli was finished, then mizhar zahir behu. We don't have to worry about that because the chaver who was the craftsman is going to be very, very careful about who's around him, and he's not going to let it happen. So it says the Gemara, really la'olam, what ended up happening in this case was mikame de gamre. Really, the spitting took place where the Am Haaretz just wasn't paying attention. He just spit onto this kli before it was actually finished. The dilma be'idna de gamre, and perhaps when the chaver was finishing making this utensil, adayin lochahi, there was still moisture from the saliva from the Am Haaretz, and therefore it caused for tumah. The Gemara says that there's a subtle implication here from our Mishnah that tvila in Ha'erev shemesh lo, that yes, we do need to take this item and put it in the mikvah in regards to kodesh. That's what our Mishnah said, that if you're gomer a kli b'tara, you still need to put it in the mikvah for kodesh, for a very high level of food. So says the Gemara, that seems to imply you only need mikvah, but you don't need ha'erev shemesh. Ha'erev shemesh is a din by certain areas of halacha that when something has to go into the mikvah, we don't assume that the purification process is complete until sun sets that night. Yet here it seems we don't need that. And masnisin de lo ke Rabbi Eliezer. Our Mishnah cannot be like Rabbi Eliezer. This is a long-winded argument. This is going to take until the bottom of the page just to understand what this means, that our Mishnah is not like Rabbi Eliezer. Here we go. Ditnan, the Mishnah writes as follows. Let's say that a person is from the ground. They're drawing out some type of material from the ground to make a container, some type of natural reed, whatever it is, to hold the efer chatas, or to hold the mei chatas, something very holy. Now, chatas was the highest level of kedusha that we learned about in our Mishnah on Daf Yomi. Rabbi Eliezer Omer yitzbol miyad, he should send it to the mikvah right away. Rabbi Yeshua Omer yitma ve'achar kach yitbol. Rabbi Yeshua says you should intentionally make it tameh. We'll see why shortly. You should intentionally make it tameh and then take it to the mikvah. Ve'havinan ba techat chaman. Who is the one who unearthed this reed? Who is the one who cut the reed from the ground to make this container for the chatas? And a similar dialogue as we had before. Ilema dechat chachaver. If the person who cut the reed from the ground was a ben Torah from guy, lama li tvila. Why would Rabbi Eliezer say that there should be any tvila at all? But if you want to say the person who cut it was an Am Haaretz, in that case, when an Am Haaretz was the one who cuts the reed, Rabbi Yeshua can't say, let's intentionally make it tameh. He's already tameh. Ha-tameh v'kai. He's an Am Haaretz. Anything he touches is going to be tameh, for sure. So that for sure doesn't make sense. We can't say that the person who cuts the reed to build the container to hold the chatas was an Am Haaretz. So Amar Rabba Bar Shila, Amar Rab Masna, Amar Shmuel, La'olam dechat chachaver. The person who cut this reed out of the ground must have been a chaver. Umishum tzinur da'am haaretz, and for the same thing, because the Am Haaretz spit on the side of the ground and it happened to land on this particular container. Denafal emas. When did he spit? When did it land on the container? If you want to say that he spit on this before it was cut, before the reed was cut from the ground, nothing that's attached to the ground could ever become tameh. It's mechubar lekarka, and there is no tuma in that case. Halav manahu. That's still not a vessel, and it's not subject to tuma. Ve'ela, it must be basar dechatcha mizhar zahir beit. If you want to say that he spit on the reed container after it was cut, that's not possible, because the chaver who was cutting it, that person is going to be super careful. Then no one should make it tameh. So therefore, says the Gemara, you're right. Le'olam mikame delichtecha. Really, the spit was from the Am Haaretz, landed on the reed before it was cut from the ground. And Dilman, perhaps beidna dechatcha, at the time that it was cut and actually made into a vessel, adayin lachahi. it was still going to be moist. Now, here's where the Gemara comes up with with the statement that we don't understand how Rabbi Eliezer could agree with our Mishnah. Bishlam Rabbi Yoshua. I remember our question. We said that it seems that we don't need hair of shemesh, that we don't need to wait until nighttime. So Bishlam Rabbi Yoshua, last short line on Chav Gimel Amud Aleph. I understand according to Rabbi Yoshua, who says that we are intentionally metame this item before we're tovel it, because Hainu deika heker litzdukin, because his approach caused for a very clear message to the tzedukim that they did not understand the halacha properly. What is this referring to? So the first long line, 3-4 lines from the bottom, it's not. Metamen hayu es hakohen hasoref es hapara lahotzi miliban shel tzedukin. They used to intentionally make something someone tamei. Shayu omrim, because they used to say, the tzedukim used to say b'me'or ve'shemesh haisanases. The tzedukim used to say that hair of shemesh was a requirement on this particular circumstance, and they were incorrect. So what the chachamim would do is they were matame him, and then they throw him in the mikvah. Great, because that way you can undo your concern about the tzdukim. Elo the Rabbi Eliezer, but according to Rabbi Eliezer, it doesn't make sense. If you say that yes, you really need hair of shemesh, then fine, I could understand that you need to separate, you need to make him tameh for some reason so that you can highlight that the tzedukim were wrong. But if in general you hold that there's no hair of shemesh, then how then would he fit with the Mishnah where we had to intentionally ensure that we were working to disprove the tzdukim? The tzdukim held that hair of shemesh was a requirement. It can't be that Rabbi Eliezer held that there was actually hair of shemesh required. So here we're going to see 3 answers. Amar Rav says, Chav Gimel Amud Beis at the top, Asauha kitmei sheretz. We actually treated this particular case like a tamei sheretz, which is a rishon on the tumah and cannot cause tumah for other things. So says the Gemara, if it cannot cause tumah for other things, elameata lo sitma adam, it shouldn't make a person tamei at all. And if that's true, alama tanya chodcho madbila ta'on tefila. Why then do we say that the person who cuts the reed has to go to the mikvah? So therefore, the Gemara goes to answer 2. We therefore look at this case like one who is tamei meis. So says the Gemara, tamei meis. That's a weak process. That doesn't make sense. Alama Tanya, why then what does the Brisa write? That chodcha umatbilin taun tefila. That this person goes to the mikvah, seemingly he goes to the mikvah right away. Tefila in hazah shlishi v'shvi lo. So it can't be that our case is talking about a similarity to tumas meis. Ella says the Gemara for the third and final answer, and we're going to stop at the 2 dots in about 5 or 6 lines halfway down. Ella says the Gemara, Asauha kitame meis b'shvi'i shelo. We treat this case like someone who's on their 7th day of tumas meis. V'hatanya, how can you say that? This halacha was all learned out from para aduma, and the Gemara says v'hatanya me'olam lo chidshu davar b'para. Para aduma is a chiddush, and in l'chavo el chidusha, you're not allowed to extract any new halachos at all from it. Samar Abaye, no. When did we say that by para aduma that the halachos are very limited and you cannot learn new things? Samar Abaye, shelo amru kordom, that a spade, which is used to poke into the ground, metame moshav kidetanya. The Brisa writes as follows: V'ayoshev al hakli, a person who sits on a kli. Yachal kafa sa'a, he turned over a vessel that holds a sav, yashav aleha, or a tarkab, which is half of a sav, yashav aleha yehe tameh. Maybe if a person is tameh and they sit on this, it becomes tameh. No. Talmud Lomar behayoshev al hakli asher yeshev alav yitma mashem yuchad liyeshiva. The only things that can become tameh under these circumstances is one who is sitting on something that's meant to be sat upon. Yatzazet, to exclude the garden tools like the spade, like the kordom that we saw earlier. She'omrim lo amod v'naseh melachtenu. Get up, you're sitting on this tool, I'm supposed to use it. We do not assume that tumah can transfer there. So that is what the Gemara has to say about many of the cases in our Mishnah, seeing this higher level of sanctity and sensitivity and halacha for Kodesh, unlike Truma. We'll stop right here. On Shabbos, we'll pick up at the middle of Chav Gimel Amud Beis and learn all of Daf Chav Dal. Wishing you all a beautiful night.